Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I guess it's a kind of part two to a video that I did about half a year ago when I sat down and talked to you about my all-time favorite fantasy series that I have ever read. I believe it might have even been my all-time favorite series because all of my all-time favorite series just happen to be fantasy. I wanted to sit down and do a part two to that and talk about my all-time favorite standalone books. And I realized I couldn't really do that because I just don't have very many fantasy books, not fantasy books, standalone books that I feel this very deep emotional connection to that I feel to a lot of fantasy series that have often been with me through years and years and years. And since in my teen years I hardly ever read standalone books, in my most formative years I didn't really read any standalone books that, you know, I grew that attached to. And with a lot of other standalone books, when I was standing in front of my shelves and just, you know, looking at my shelves, I was like, you know what, there's a lot that I love, but the ones that I felt myself reaching towards were mostly books that I had read in the recent years. And I know that there are other standalone books that I have loved as much when I first read them, but it's just been longer since I read them, so that love isn't as fresh on my mind, if that makes sense. So yeah, this video is less a video of my all-time favorite fantasy books, or fantasy standalones, not even fantasy, all-time favorite standalones, and more so a video of this specific moment in time and which books I felt talking to you about, although a lot of those just like hit me emotionally very much, so there are some that still belong on that all-time favorites list, so I will keep those towards the end of the video. And yeah, so kind of let's just go into it. And because actually, let me just very quickly look up if I said it was my all-time favorite fantasy series or just standalones. Yeah, I did call it my all-time favorite and in parentheses SFF series of all time. But, you know, I think it's more to do with SFF just having more series. But regardless, I will start. I actually only have one book on this list that I would say definitely isn't SFF. And then there's another book that I personally don't count as SFF. And also you will see, I think, a common denominator in what type of standalone books I end up highly enjoying and loving. But the one that isn't SFF is actually an exception in other ways as well, because I think it's the only YA on this list. And that is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. This book is an indigenous YA thriller, and we follow our main character Donis, who is a high schooler. I believe she's a senior, possibly, at this school near an Ojibwe reservation. And at the beginning of the story she witnesses a murder, and after that reluctantly agrees to help the FBI in their investigation and become a kind of secret informant for them. And so there are more deaths that keep on happening, and she's kind of drawn into this whole mystery of what is going on. And there's a lot of stuff talking about the vulnerability of indigenous girls and young women, the difficulty in the, or unfairness and difficulty in the, what's it called, in the law system, legal system, when it comes to reservations, and also crimes committed often against indigenous women on reservations, etc., and how hard it can be to, you know, bring the perpetrators to justice. I read this 2021 when it first came out. I absolutely loved and adored it and was so surprised because this is not at all a genre that I typically read. I picked this up on a whim because it has a gorgeous cover and it's written by an indigenous author. And at the time, this was, I think, the only indigenous written book that my bookstore had. So I was like, I'm gonna have to pick this up. So yeah, just absolutely adore it. So I had to very quickly change the battery on my camera, The next book is a book that I wanted to talk about earlier in the video because I am not sure yet how much of an all-time favorite it is and how much it's like, because it's very fresh on my mind and I very recently read it. But the book I want to talk about is Wom City by Claude Tsumasa. Actually, for this video, I want to film a video reading 1-star reviews because yeah, it's the way, like, not to be arrogant, but the way the 1-star reviews just show how the readers don't get the book is, like, I don't typically say that, but with this one it's wild. Anyway, this is a book by a Botswanan author. I learned recently that apparently you call people from Botswana Botswanan. So, new things you learn every day. Anyway, this is by a Botswanan author and it's a kind of, well, it's definitely Afrofuturism, but it's a dystopian paranormal horror type story. There's a lot of genres coming together in the story. I did recently film a whole review of this, so I will keep myself short. But basically it's set in this world where there's body hopping and also people who own bodies who have committed crimes or live in bodies who have committed crimes in the past are microchipped, and that mostly hits women the hardest. And it's so those bodies, those people living in those bodies cannot commit crimes in the future, and it's done with the pretense that this will make everyone safer. And our main character lives in such a microchip body, and shit starts happening when, even though it shouldn't be happening because the microchip should have stopped her, she's out on a joyride with her affair and they kill a woman with the car. And so once the woman's vengeance ghost starts coming after our main character Nela's family, just stuff is happening, social stuff is happening, and there's like a lot of horror stuff, but also societal commentary, etc, etc. I absolutely loved and adored this book. I almost gave it 5 stars. The end was a bit too fast for me personally, which was why I gave it 4.75 stars, but it's about as close to a 5-star as it can get. I absolutely love the world building, I love the writing. I did this via audiobook, absolutely love the narration in the audiobook, and yeah, I can just very, very highly recommend it. By the way, I'm trying to go through these books quicker than I usually do because I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books to get through. Although 2 of those books I will do at once, so yeah. Anyway, let's continue on with another one, which I will also put further towards the beginning because it's been quite a few years since I've read this book, but I definitely want to reread it. And this author is apparently coming out with the first book in a trilogy in 2025, I think, so I'm very excited. But the book I'm talking about is The Queens of Inisha by Tessa Gretton. This is a high fantasy retelling, high fantasy low magic retelling of King Lear. And if you know the story of King Lear, the story of King Lear is about a king slowly going mad who has 3 daughters, and he wants one of those daughters to inherit the kingdom. And so he asks all the 3 daughters to prove how much they love him. However, the daughter who actually loves him the most and doesn't, you know, just love him or want to show him to love him to inherit the kingdom, refuses to take part in the game, and because of that the king then banishes her. And in this story we follow the 3 sisters, we follow the 3 daughters, and we follow them as their lives slowly start falling apart around them. I do not really want to say anything more, but I just remember I loved the writing. I love the characterizations. This is a very low action, very like introspective type of fantasy story. So if you prefer fantasy with a lot of action, this probably won't be for you. It's a very slow story. It's very much about the inner goings on of the characters, but that's just the type of fantasy that I absolutely love and adore. And actually maybe I'll keep this off my shelves and I'll reread it next month or something. Next one I have is A Dor of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I am so excited to get started on an education in malice. I do own it already, but I'm just scared to start it. Dor of Blood is also retelling, which is kind of what I was about when I said that there will be a type of theme in these stories, because the types of standalones that I typically enjoy aren't the ones that are very complex in their world building or in their stories, but are more so very much, not always experimental in their writing and everything, but are stories that are very much in the direction of modern fairy tales, working with archetypes, working with stereotypes, etc., and focusing on one, maybe two characters. So, Dor of Blood, I'm so happy that I still have the indie published version and not the new one, because this one is so much more gorgeous. Anyway, this is a retelling of the Brides of Dracula, and we follow Constanta, who is one of the Brides of Dracula, and the way this book is set up is it's Constanta writing a letter to you, Dracula. So it's in second person narration, just so you're aware of that, and it's about this very toxic relationship, but also Constanta with the other Brides of Dracula finding still love in each other while being in this very toxic relationship with Dracula. Really interesting, absolutely loved it, absolutely gorgeous writing, and yeah, I can highly recommend it. So next is the book that I think, like, I personally wouldn't necessarily consider SFF, even though I might consider it as speculative fiction, but I think a lot of people would disagree with me, and that book is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Madeline Miller is one of my all-time favorite writers. Her writing is just gorgeous and beautiful and stunning and amazing. The reason why I don't necessarily classify this as fantasy, even though a lot of people put it on fantasy lists, is because for me, like, straight up mythology retellings that adhere very closely to mythological aspects, and depending on how much like importance the gods play and stuff, but even if they play a lot of importance, it's kind of hard for me to classify this as fantasy, because what it really is the inclusion of religious beliefs within the fantasy story, so it kind of belongs into a different category for me, although generally speaking it's still SFF, obviously. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I don't think I need to tell anyone what the Song of Achilles is about. This is a retelling of the Iliad. However, it starts quite a few years earlier. It's told from the perspective of Patroclus, and it starts in his childhood and follows him as he meets and gets to know Achilles, as the two of them train together and then go to the war in Troy. This is an absolutely beautiful story. I really love it. I love Madeline Miller's writing. It's heart-wrenching. I cried so much by the end of it. It's definitely a story written for people who already are somewhat familiar with the Iliad, but I don't think you need to have read it. I haven't read the original Iliad, but there's, like, I don't think that you can get the full emotional scope of it if you don't already know what's going to happen by the end of the story. So it's kind of like there's no spoilers for this book, because you kind of need to know what happens already to fully get the importance of a lot of the conversations in the story. But yeah, I just love it. I adore it. I love Madeline Miller's writing, and yeah, I need to reread it, like, desperately. Next, I have a book where the author actually made me just realize that I maybe should do a new video or an updated video of my current autobiographies, because this author with this book and the latest one that she released in 2023 definitely has cemented herself or themselves on the list. I do think Ava Reid, yeah, uses she, her pronouns, at least in the auto bio and stuff, but Ava Reid identifies as non-binary. So I'm never quite clear which pronouns to use, but Juniper and Thorn is the book I'm talking about. This is another fairy tale retelling. It's a fairy tale retelling of the Juniper Tree, which I haven't read yet, and I definitely need to still read that. The first book by Ava Reid, The Wolf and the Woodsman, I wasn't quite sure about. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't quite sure about. I definitely need to reread it, but this one I adored and loved. It was one of my favorite books in the year that I read it. Actually, I think it goes for pretty much all of the books that I'm talking about, except for Wom City, because obviously 2024 isn't over yet. But these books were favorites in the years that I read them. So Juniper and Thorn follows Marlinchen, who is the youngest of 3 sisters, who are the only daughters of this very, well, he says he is a powerful magician, and he's the last magician in a world that is slowly turning towards modernity. And Marlinchen at the beginning of the story is very shy, very introverted, and when she sneaks out one night with her sisters, she meets a ballet dancer, and from that point on everything changes. This story is a story about survival, it's a story about toxic family relationships, it's a story about greed, it's a story about kind of finding yourself and finding your footing when you were never given the chance to, and it's beautifully, gorgeously written. I love Ava Reid's writing. It's just, I can highly recommend it. We are now, like, also aside from the fact that most of the last books that I told you about were retellings, something that makes Standalones all-time favorites is the writing of the authors. And these authors have all by now become all-time favorite authors of mine. And so the next one I have is Orphea by Joanne M. Harris. Joanne Harris is also an amazing modern fairy tale storyteller. This one is a retelling, well, first of all, it's part of a series of shorter books that Harris wrote that are all retellings or inspired by the Child Ballads. And then this, as a secondary retelling, is also a retelling of Orpheus, which kind of, the name gives the hint already. However, we're not following a man who is going to the underworld to save his wife. We are following a mother whose daughter committed suicide and who is now traveling to the underworld to find her again. And this deals also a lot with grief. It deals with letting go. It deals with doing what is necessary to save people that you love. And it especially deals with the grief that a mother has. So yeah, Joanne Harris's writing is just gorgeous, beautiful, evocative. I love everything about it. Next are 2 books that I want to talk about because, yeah, just because. And that is Siren Queen as well as The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nivo. I think if I had to decide, I probably enjoyed The Chosen and the Beautiful slightly more than I enjoyed Siren Queen. Both are set in America, I think around the 1920s. Siren Queen is set in Hollywood before the Hays Code, and we follow the daughter of Asian immigrants as she tries to become a movie star in a world. Like, both of these are very, I wouldn't necessarily call them urban fantasy stories, although they technically are. I would more so call both of them magical realism, because the magic is there a lot to make commentary, and especially make commentary in like post-colonial narrative type of ways. And then The Chosen and the Beautiful is a retelling of The Great Gatsby, but from, I forgot what her, Jordan Baker's perspective. So Nick's girlfriend, I think. I never read the original, so I'm not quite sure if that's what it was. Both of them are also sapphic, and yeah, Nivo is another one. Like, if I had to choose 4 writers who have my favorite writing styles in the world, I would choose these 4 authors. So Madeline Miller, Ava Reid, Joanne Harris, and Devo. These 4 writers, if you are into evocative, poetic, just absolutely out of this world, gorgeous writing styles, read these 4 authors. Then next we have the one high fantasy story that I think a lot of you might have been waiting for on this list, and that is obviously The Sword of Kant by M.L. Wang. I know that this book is very, very hyped in certain circles. However, I'm just here to tell you it is in no shape or way overhyped, like at all. In this story we follow Misaki and Mamoru. Mamoru is like a teen boy living in this village who belongs to one of the leading families of the village, and the people in the surrounding areas have always been told that they were the ones, or they are the reason basically that this country is never invaded, because they are all-powerful warriors. And Misaki is Mamoru's mother. However, she does not, or well, she has not always been in that village, in that region where they live now. She has seen a lot more of the world, and she kind of has a bit of a secret past. And everything comes to a clash when an invasion starts happening. And so there's a lot in this story. It's really interesting because, like, what you would usually expect to be the main story of the book is over after about the halfway point, and then the later half of the book is more so about dealing with the aftermath, and that is what the story really, really is about. And I cried through the last, I think, 200 pages of the book. This story hit me. It hit me so hard. It's beautifully written. The interpersonal relationships between all of the characters are so well done, and the conflicts between all of the characters are so well done. The characterizations, I love it. I absolutely love it. And then the last book is actually my favorite book of all time, and every time I haven't read this book in a while, I'm like, okay, but is it though, or am I just saying this to be pretentious and like, I don't know, but then I read it again and I'm like, no, this is my favorite book. And the book I'm talking about is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. There is a reason why I'm collecting all different editions of this book. I could probably in every video that I mention this pick up a different edition. I have 11 by now. Maybe I'll do a collection at some point, or a collection video. Tell me in the comments down below if you'd be interested in seeing that. I don't think I have to say that much about The Picture of Dorian Gray. The Picture of Dorian Gray is about a young man who for the first time enters London and the big city, and there is corrupted by Lord Henry to a point where he thinks his beauty is his utmost weapon and tool, and he never wants to lose it. And so when he has a portrait drawn of him, he inadvertently makes a deal that the portrait will age instead of him. And so, yeah, it's a lot about society at the time. There's a lot of commentary in there. I read the annotated edition of the original version, because there was a second version published later that was kind of censored a little bit. I read the annotated original version. There's so much in this book. I just absolutely love it. What can I say? Also, once again, beautifully written. And yeah, with that being said, that was my, I guess, all-time, or some of my all-time favorite standalones, mostly SFF standalones. And yeah, if you also have some of these books on your list of all-time favorite books, tell me in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up, and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, adult fantasy book I should say, will be left linked down below, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!